in March 1959, Frankie Valli, Frankie Avalon, had the number one song in the entire nation. And I brought that up because we are a week late getting a show on. But in 1959, on March 10th, was the first year that the day that I walked in and began my non-illustrious radio career. It was at WANS in Anderson, South Carolina. At the time, it was on 1280 AM. At the time, all it was a little 1,000-watt AM radio station located on Clemson Boulevard, where Toys R Us is located right now. And later, we went to 5,000 watts. Then even later, went to an FM station, which is now Jams FM. I was on, I don't know, 2 or 3 different times I worked there, total about 20 years at ANS. And I thought I would just kind of look back and see what were the hit records. Lloyd Price had a hit. The Chipmunks had a hit back at that time. And a little bit later, Dave Baby Cortez had something called the Happy Organ, which was a bright little tune that was on the electric organ that he played, and it was a lot of fun back in those days, too. And so down through the many, many years afterwards, I have had an opportunity to do a lot of things in the business, and I worked with some great people down through all those years. Probably you in the sports world, those of you who are listening who are sports people, will remember, of course, Jim Phillips at the Clemson Network. Now, Jim, back in those days, Jim and I worked together at Channel 4 over in Greenville. We were the sports department, the two of us. And we had a great time during those times. And later on, I went back to ANS one more time. Then Joe and I got together and worked at the I'm trying to stop a piece of equipment from working here. Then we got back together and worked at on the Clemson football and basketball networks for quite some time. And Jim and I were friends for many, many years. Later, strangely enough, his son Jeff became my color commentator when I did several years of Clemson women's basketball. And Jeff Cobb Oxford helped me some do that. And Jeff, and I don't remember who all else down through the years helped do that. Job didn't pay hardly anything, so it was hard to keep anybody. and the play-by-play guy, trust me, didn't make a lot of money. So, nonetheless, that's why I played Frankie Avalon to start this little program. Speaking of Clemson women's basketball, back in those days, they played Georgia every year. I don't know if they ever beat Georgia or not, but Andy Landers was the coach over at Georgia, an extremely close friend with then Clemson coach Jim Davis. Andy announced his retirement just this week that we're doing this show. Andy had a fine career, 36 years at Georgia. Never won the national championship, but he had 4 Final Fours. At Georgia, Andy won 860 games and lost 296. Prior to then, he was at a place called Roane State. He was 81-21. Vince Dooley hired him when Vince was the AD at Georgia. And Andy was I never really got to know him. I got lineups from him, spoke to him and that kind of thing, but I never really got to know him. I know he and Jim Davis were very good friends. And I don't think Jim, during my period, ever beat Andy. He may have, but Andy was just great as a basketball coach. But he's been at it 36 years, and he's 62 or 4 years old. And along about that time, you lose the fire in your belly. I can tell you about it because I have experience when you just kind of lose the desire, the passion to do these things. So anyway, that's I just wanted to throw all that in there. Basketball, so-called March Madness. There was a little thing about it. Some guy started calling it March Madness many, many years ago. And later, March Madness was named and really began to be used on CBS by Musburger. Musburger, this story came out of, I think, the USA Today, that Musburger started being the first one to call it March Madness. I read that somewhere. And it finally got to be, I think, the NCAA copyrighted that, and there's a high school March Madness, too, that's allowed. But anyway, March Madness, people talking brackets. I've never been able to. I think I've filled out brackets twice. It makes me a nervous wreck to try to do brackets as we go along through this thing. And brackets is what everybody is talking about, and we may talk, in fact, we're going to talk a little bit about brackets as the time goes along. I read a little article today, too, that the teams that people are pulling against in March Madness start off with Kentucky. Most of these teams people are pulling against is because they win all the time. It's kind of like the people that don't like the Yankees in baseball. They just win, win, win. Used to be the Packers, and win, 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 and that kind of thing. And the Dallas Cowboys, too. Now, there are those of us who don't like the Dallas Cowboys because we're Redskin fans, and that's a totally different idea, you know. But some of the things that people don't like, they don't like Calipari. They don't trust him. They don't think he's super honest. And so they just pull against Kentucky. Now, I've always been of the theory that a team needs to lose somewhere along the line before they get into a situation like this, but they're about 34-0 now. In fact, that's exactly what they are. They're 34-0. And so, I don't know, is there pressure on them to keep winning, or are they good enough to keep on going? And how many of these guys will be back next year? Because this is that one-and-done type thing that goes on nowadays. Other teams people don't like to pull for are Duke. And Duke is the same thing. People don't like Krzyzewski. They don't like some of the players. I don't know. They hated Bobby Hurley, who is coaching, by the way, in the, I think he's coaching University of Buffalo in the March Madness. But also, they don't like Virginia this year because Virginia scores about 60 points a night. That's all. They just dull. Virginia Cavaliers. Gonzaga. Gonzaga is one of those teams that kind of comes along and spoils things, and it's one of those upstarts. They never quite get it done. Never quite get it over. They get up in there and they play, and they got all this publicity and those things. And those are teams that people just, for some reason, just don't like. And so, but all those teams are in there. You Clemson fans, 3 ex-Clemson coaches have teams that are in the big dance, as everybody knows. And, of course, that's Cliff Ellis down at Coastal Carolina. That's a guy some people didn't like. I always liked him, knew him fairly well at one time, did some business with him other than sports, involving some real estate. And of course, Rick Barnes made everybody mad because he left here and said a few things. But he's got Texas back in there, and he better, because he's under some pressure out there. And Rick Barnes has got them going. And then, who's the other Clemson coach? I lost my mind just there for a moment thinking about poor old Rick. Not being able to get into the Final Four with Texas, maybe once or twice. Oh, and then a guy that for some reason a lot of people didn't like because they didn't think he might not have been up to the job when he was at Clemson, coming in after Barnes and going into the ACC that quickly. One of the great nice guys ever is Larry Shyatt, who coaches out at Wyoming now, has Larry Nance Jr. on his team. And Larry was hurt earlier. When he got better, they started winning again. And they're in the dance, and I just think it's great because I think so much of Larry Shyatt. And I'm just glad that he made it. I feel the same way, by the way, about Cliff. I'm glad to see. Cliff is the only coach I know of that won 150 games at 4 different schools: South Alabama, Clemson, Auburn, and Coastal Carolina. Now, he may have his problems. He's had some little problems off to the side there that some people kind of sniffed around with the NCAA. Nothing real serious, but he did a few things. One of them involved Greg Buckner. Buckingham involved, and Buckingham graduated from Clemson, even though they said oh, that guy can't even get in school, and the NCAA didn't like it because he got in, but he got in and graduated and went on and played some professional ball over in Europe and married a lady who played for Jim Davis, and she may have played a little pro women's ball too. She was might have been the ACC Women's Player of the Year one year, and all of a sudden, I can't think of her name either. It's another senior moment that I'm having, but I was broadcasting games during that period of time. And Buck worked for me in another business during some summers, did a little work for me. And matter of fact, it was summertime work, and Annie Claire Tribble, the late and great Annie Claire Tribble, called me up and said, Ken, if you got a little work, we can get some of these players to do. And it was just some kind of yard work, that kind of thing. We paid them made sure that we paid them the going rate and didn't overpay them. And these kind of things. But all that. Anyway, I sometimes I'll get way off subject. And appreciate you folks who are listening. We got folks listening in several places around. In Charleston, somebody in Florida is listening to us occasionally. We're not on every single week. We could be on every day. I'm just too lazy. And Cobb is not with me today because he had other things he had to do. I like to have somebody with me, so I don't try to stick you to listening to me at all the time. And so, therefore, I'm going to play a little something here from Mike Bray. He's the head basketball coach at Notre Dame, and they're very, very proud. I think they should be, considering what they did. They should be proud, knocking off everybody and getting to be in the ACC tournament and winning the ACC tournament. And they got something to be proud about. So as I go along here and see if I can make some of these things work. And if I can, we're going to hear from him right now.
We broke this thing down into 3 mini tournaments, and the first one is the Pittsburgh tournament. There's 4 teams over there, us and Northeastern, Texas and Butler. We want to win 2 and win the Pittsburgh tournament. That's our first step. Then we'll come back home and regroup. We are thrilled to go to Pittsburgh. That's a great Notre Dame town. I congratulated our guys to earn a 3 seed, and I think that's very powerful. And we certainly feel we have some momentum in that, how we played in Greensboro. I think that can carry over into this next tournament. We would not have won the championship in Greensboro without being able to defend for 3 nights. It started with Demetrius Jackson being our starting point guard. He really can pressure the ball, and he starts things for us. And then I think an overall commitment to it starting last spring in the off season. The rest of our guys have really bought in, and that's where we've really helped ourselves.
Okay, there he is. That's Mike Bray. He is the head basketball coach at Notre Dame, and they're very, very proud for what they've done. And I know Tim Beret, SID up at Clemson. I think they call him now the football SID, but he's involved in all the other sports and things there too. But Tim is a graduate of Notre Dame, and I'm sure he is very, very proud of what they have done up there. So, okay, the big tournament. We're not going to talk much about the play-in games, and I'm not going to. There's so many guys that know more than I on your ESPN, your Fox Sports, and all your radio things that are talking about all of these. So we'll just, as the time goes along, we may come in and do another show and talk about those things. But the ACC, got 5 in or 6? What was in SEC? Got about the same amount without me counting them. Anyone to look it up? Clemson women, bad basketball, last several years, been bad. Poor old Jim got bad under him and has gotten worse with the 2 coaches they have hired under them. But the women from South Carolina, they have got themselves a number 1 seed, and I just think it's great. Dawn Staley is 30-2.